Okay, we're live with HB196. We're right in the House on the last day of voting of our session. So here we go. I'm going to share the screen.
Open the process up to give this to who knows who, a commission that we're now abolishing, that both this chamber, the chamber across the hall, and the governor signed, and that we're basically allowing a couple of individuals to rewrite the law. I just think we are 45 days away from having oil on the shelf, and to bring forth legislation that would put this in jeopardy when we are in fact, two of our.
Is there a question there, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman?
Is it not true that the two Class 1 licenses are producing, and we are one lawsuit away in full county for the other 4 to start producing, and we would have the 6 licenses that this body, the body across the hall, and the governor signed?
If the gentleman thinks that's correct, I'm sure that he believes in his heart and soul he's right. But then again, that gentleman represents one of the cannabis operations that has a monopoly in this state today. These are the same arguments that were heard in the House the House Judiciary, non-civil judiciary. Now, as far as the litigation and the constitutional requirements, this legislative body has the ability to change and to correct any of this body has the ability to pass legislation to correct and to change anything that may have been disparaged or any errors in judgment by previous legislative bodies. Now, the argument was made in the House Judiciary Committee by some of these attorneys representing the two companies that have a virtual monopoly in this state. Now, there's 4 that have not been, that were tentatively awarded, and you have 9. And for the people in the House, that they may remember the arguments, that the 9 that protesters, they protested because of the process of the evaluation, which was not dealt with, and that's the reason it's in litigation today. This has been tied up, and it has the potential, according to the attorneys on judiciary and to the attorneys that basically spoke during these committee meetings, that this could be tied up for a number of years. And most of us have realized that it is not healthy to have 2 companies to have a virtual monopoly in this state.
Is it not true those 2 large companies that you're referring to testified in committee, both in the House and the Senate, that they wish the other 4 were producing? And the only reason we have a duopoly is because the protesters keep filing additional lawsuits. And if it is the goal of this body and everyone else to get medicine to the patients within 45 days, is it not true we should vote no on this bill? I appreciate your passion. We've been on the opposite side of this for a couple of years. I'm glad we agree on every other issue, and I appreciate your efforts.
Appreciate your zealousness to represent from this floor the interest of the company that's located in your district.
Well, the gentleman will stick to answering the questions very closely. Now, you have a lot of questions here, Mr. Chairman, so we're going to have a couple of more. Representative Stacey Evans is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, is it true, I'm looking at the documents here, the bill you're asking us to agree to is 54 pages. Am I right?
There's a second part that's going to be addressed, again, dealing with hemp legislation.
Will you further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
That 54-page bill that we're asked to agree to right now is much different than the 12-page bill that was vetted in committee in the House and voted on by this body on crossover day. True?
That is correct.
Will you further yield?
I certainly will.
Do you share my concern that if we make these changes, which is now going to be the second session that we've made significant changes to this commission, that we really urge anybody who's gone through a competitive bidding process and lost to run to the courthouse and create a bunch of chaos to make us sort of chase our tails around here and keep changing and changing and changing and really take away uncertainty for business and for consumers, and most importantly for patients who need this medicine.
As a learned attorney who makes her living serving as an attorney for litigants, I'm sure that you understand that everyone has got a right to file suit if they've been wronged. It was the opinion of these protesters that they had not been done correct, because you may remember the language that we had talked about, or that I had spoke from, was when the applications were given, you had the commission members that divvied them up. The same application was put forth, but that yet whenever the applications were done, they were graded on a numerical system, so that the same answer, no matter what it might have been, it was given a 1 or a 5. So it was basically a system that was flawed from the beginning. There's where it has brought this forward. And if I may further address, in this bill, over half of the pages deal with just disassembling the commission and then reassembling it under the authority of the Ag Commissioner. The base of the bills continues to be what it was when we passed, with that exception. Then the back, starting on page 40 of this bill, deals with the hemp that Chairman Perkle and Chairman Corbett so diligently dealt with. That starts on page 40 in section 2. Now, that was a consumer bill that I'm going to address, or they will address through questions. But that's to be sure that we don't have adulterated CDB hemp-based products that are being imported to the state, the synthetic grade products, the things that create a more of a health issue to the people of Georgia. So in fact, you have 2 bills that were basically disregarded in the Senate committee at the whim of one of the people that was chairing that meeting. So that's where the limit, you asked about the page numbers, that's where the number of pages come from. Be glad to answer any specific questions, but if what you're saying is, and your original question, is it not right that we're giving someone, we're not saying that the commissioner will give a license. They will then have the opportunity to go through mediation to see if they meet the qualifications, and then he can have the ability to move forward if they so desire.
We yield for one final
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
I understand your point about legislation relating to hemp being added, but that still would make this bill that we're asked to vote on today with other than being able to ask you questions, no real debate. We're not allowed to come up and speak. So 38 pages compared to 12 that we passed out of this House on crossover that was subject to the committee process. Am I right that that means that this is 38 pages of legislation that has not gone through the committee process?
This legislation has gone through the process, and we're debating it as a committee of the whole House at this point. I'll be more than glad to go by section for the good lady if she wishes.
Well, I wish we could have a full debate, but unfortunately our House rules don't allow us to do that. But thank you.
If you would prefer, I'll be glad to go section by section through the bill to show you where the number of pages that you're talking about were created.
Let's go.
Gentlemen, you for another question. To your right, Chairman Perkle is recognized for a question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's Jim Yield.
Yes, sir.
I will not ask you to go through section by section. Is it not true that the part 2 of the amendment is virtually identical to HB 458? The only change being to tighten the guardrails that we've talked about with hemp as it relates to this consumer protection bill.
You're absolutely right.
Could I ask one further question?
Yes, sir.
Is it not true that a recent Journal of American Medical Association study found that 76% of hemp products are inaccurately labeled, and the part 2 of this bill that was passed out of this body 168-2 seeks to do 2 things: provide consumer protections and to make sure that those under 21 do not have the ability to purchase these products.
You're absolutely right. And I thank you for y'all's work on this.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, further yield?
Yes, sir.
Let's see, Representative Shay Roberts to your left out front.
Will the
Recognized for a
gentleman
question.
yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I was sat through the hearings and I listened to a lot of it. This is a lot different than what was there. I want these people to be able to get the medicine they need. So I just want to be clear. I'm not necessarily opposed to going to the Ag Commission. I always love more transparency in government. But if we do this, is that going to hold up the current people who got the licenses from getting the product out to the people who need it?
No, ma'am. If this bill passes the way it is or in its similar form to this, by abolishing the Cannabis Commission, moving it to the Commissioner of Agriculture and the oversight committees there, then they have a date by May 31st that they've got to enter into mediation with the protesters. If the protesters show good cause that they are under the standards that they're eligible, then they will be allowed to have a license. If and under the condition that they drop any litigation. And that's the determining factor. This goes back to the same argument that was made that this is going to be tied up for probably a considerable period of time. It's in the Court of Appeals right now, has the potential to go into the Supreme Court.
But I don't know that I feel like this is actually going to get us out of litigation. It may get us back into more litigation, and that's the part that I'm struggling with, I'll be honest.
Well, the language that you had heard from one of the earlier questions was the same language that was used by some of the attorney lobbyists that were representing the two companies that had received that got out before the TRO was issued. And they used a lot of clever language about how they could sue and such as that. There's nothing that prohibits the General Assembly of Georgia for changing laws to fix litigation, such as at any time through legislative action, this body can add as many more as they wanted to. So there's no litigation to be filed. These were veiled threats, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the Judiciary Committee, because they passed it out pretty handily.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Gentleman yield. Majority Leader Estration, right in front of you.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. Gentlemen yield for a series of questions.
Yes, sir.
Probably yes or no questions. So first of all, as members are concerned about the legislation that's before them, we can actually go through briefly, because as you point out, the whole first part of the bill dealing with the Cannabis Commission and now the Ag Commissioner regulating this, as a lot of pages just related to removing commission and replacing it with the department. Isn't that true?
That is correct.
Isn't it true that the transparency provisions that were in House Bill 196 that this body previously voted on and passed are included in here to provide transparency to this process?
Absolutely.
Isn't it true that the bill here, as we look at section 1.6, would create legislative oversight of this process so that there would be specific legislators who would have the ability to ensure that this new system that would be in place is being handled properly, and that if there are issues that come up, that action can be taken by the General Assembly?
Absolutely correct.
Isn't it true that section 1.8 for the class 1 licenses and a companion section in 1.9 for the class 2 licenses would simply allow for the Department of Agriculture to issue licenses consistent with their new oversight of this cannabis process?
Absolutely.
And isn't it true that the only mandate, there was a questioner earlier asked about, it's unconstitutional to mandate the outcome of litigation, that's not what is being done in this bill at all. There is no requirement that licenses be issued to any protesters. Isn't that true?
Absolutely right.
Isn't it true that the only thing required is that the department engage in mediation with those protesters, and that take place by the end of May? So to the gentlelady's concern, that there is an expedited period within which these protests could potentially be resolved.
You're absolutely correct.
Isn't it true that the trigger, what I call the trigger provision that deals with the automatic ability of the department to issue subsequent licenses into the future to ensure that there is not a monopoly by a small number of holders of these licenses remains in this bill. And that is similar to language that we passed out of this body in House Bill 196 before. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And the only difference here is an actual increase in the number of patients that would be on the registry. So to the concern that was raised earlier that maybe the license holders could address the need, there would be a greater number of patients needed compared to what we passed on House Bill 196 for additional licenses to be available for issue. Is
You
that
are
true?
correct.
And then finally, with respect to the conditions for coverage, only UC, ulcerative colitis, is being added as an additional condition. No other conditions, as maybe have been. So in other words, the only additional condition today is the one that was debated in committee in the House, correct?
That is correct.
Now, part 2 of the bill dealing with hemp, that legislation was carried by Chairman Perkle and previously passed this House overwhelmingly, correct?
Absolutely.
And that includes common sense measures to ensure that ingestible hemp products are properly regulated so that minors don't have access to those products, and so that we have a regulatory structure in place for the reality of these new ingestible hemp products. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman has a couple of questions. Will he yield?
Yes, sir.
Representative Hutchinson, to your right, has a question. Ladies recognized.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it not true that this legislation will move the needle forward for all of the patients who have been patiently waiting for medical cannabis for the last 7 years?
Yes, ma'am. You're exactly right, and thank you.
Thank you for bringing this legislation.
To your right, Chairman Newton is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir, for this legislation. I do want to point out that as you move it from the Medical Cannabis Commission to the Department of Agriculture, is it correct that there's nothing in this bill that changes the use that's been approved by this body, that rather
Absolutely.
than recreational, this is really for compassionate medical use, and that's your
You're
goal?
absolutely right. This sticks into the medical category. There's no recreational drugs allowed in this.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yield.
Yes, sir. Maybe one more question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wilt Park is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in conclusion, Chairman Powell, is it not true that this bill would expand access to THC oil by expanding the number of licenses while putting additional restrictions on hemp products? Is how I'm reading it.
It will expand the production of medical cannabis facilities and stop the duopoly that exists right now. On the hemp part of the bill that was sponsored by Chairman Perkle, this puts guardrails into the hemp, the CDB type things, the Delta things, and those type of products in the gummies, to be sure that any of these products that are sent into Georgia, whether it be from wherever, overseas or the West Coast or wherever, that they're not synthetic and that they meet certain health standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have one more, and we'll have them all done since you're just about there. This is our last question.
Mr. Speaker, I'll do one more and then I'll finish it up.
Representative Willis is recognized for a question. Representative Inca Willis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To
Does
your
the
right.
gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it true that this legislation not only addresses the existing duopoly and current licensure and allows for more transparency and process?
You're absolutely right.
Does the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it true that proper regulation of specified hemp products serves to protect the consumers of Georgia?
You're absolutely right.
And would the gentleman graciously yield one more time?
I certainly will.
Isn't it true that on the other side of this debate that has lasted for years, there will be thousands of Georgians that will receive medicine that they desperately need to improve their quality of life, especially our seniors?
You're absolutely right, and that's what is most important.
Thank you for bringing this bill.
And thank you for the questions. Mr. Speaker, if I might sum this up to the ladies and gentlemen, the question that came because of the number of volume of pages in this. Well, first 40 pages of this deals with the cannabis, and most of those deal with disassembling the commission and moving it to the Department of Agriculture. Certain language was put in there to be sure that we're not saying that we're rewarding anybody because they have filed a lawsuit, but they have to go through the mediation process. We have put a lot of efforts into this, and I would encourage you to move forward, especially the language that Chairman Perkle and his folks had put together about the other protections under the CDB-based products. And that, Mr. Speaker, is a bill, and I'll be more than glad to support all of your help on this bill, and let's move it back to the Senate.
The gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the adoption of the House amendment? The chair hears none. The House amendment is adopted. On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 196 as amended by the House. All those in favor will vote yes. Those opposed will vote no. And the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the yeas are 154, the nays 13. The House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 196 as amended by the House. Floor Leader Gamble is recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that we disagree to the Senate amendment to Senate Bill 246.
Clerk will read the caption.
Okay. All right. Well, now it's going to the Senate, which has to happen today. Today's the last day of session, so things are going back and forth and back and forth. But the hemp bill passed now, and now it's going back to the Senate. How confusing can you get, right? And it looks like there's a chance for the hemp processing fee to be lowered, but it looks like there's perhaps a chance for a bunch of D8 products to be banned, perhaps limited in certain quantities. So I will, I guess, pop on here live maybe if I catch it being voted on in the Senate, so we can catch that debate if it even makes it there. And SB 97 by itself, I think, is stuck in rules in House. And so there's a chance that that could be voted on in the House as well. And I guess when a sub is submitted, it has to go back and forth. But I guess it doesn't matter if it's past crossover as long as it's a sub. So all these weird rules, I say stick with the laws of nature. All right, all the five. See y'all later.